From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, I'm glad we're back, and I think that this is going to be an episode that you'll really be able to relate to.
Oh yeah, it's great to be back, and I will say this topic I think is right in my wheelhouse.
I, so I thought of you and our whole theme of Ask the Programmer, and I figured maybe it's time for me to ask you some things, and in particular, we're going to talk today about IT. And I know for years, ever since I know you, you've been talking about how AV is IT, and that's always been an argument and a debate. And I really agree with you, and I think that there's probably a lot of things that AV is not within IT, but but there is a lot that works together, and there is a marriage there, and I think that's been the case for many years to come. So why don't we just start with the basics when we're talking about IT first? What would you define it as, and how does AV fit into the IT world?
I think that's the most important question to ask is how you're defining IT. Because when you don't define it clearly, then you get into, well, no, it's not IT, or you get into that gray area. To me, IT is information technology, or using information to get, or using technology to get information across, which we're doing with our AV systems. We're taking
Absolutely.
analog, we're using light and sound, and to send video and audio and even lighting to our end users, or information to our end users. Or we're taking information from one person and sending it to mass people. So to me, that's why I keep saying AV is IT, because it's information technology. So that to me is how I define IT, and why I put AV underneath the IT umbrella, or as I like to say, blob, because it keeps eating more and more as IT grows. Like now you have the Internet of Things, and you got networking, and you got database administrators, you got help desk support, you got phone support. All this stuff is now falling underneath that IT umbrella, or blob, as I say.
So it would make sense based on that definition for sure. And I think my definition of AV is the way that we help people communicate, and we also are able to convey a message or entertain, and the science behind it has very very specific requirements, and some of those may be on a little bit outside of what would be considered the ones and zeros of IT, but I would agree with you there. Now, um, when we think of IT, and I think maybe the average person does, they think about switches and networks and so forth. Is that the way you would also expect that somebody would think of it, or should they be thinking a little bit differently?
I I agree with you that most people think of it as networking, and that's why a lot of people say, well, AV is not IT, because you don't have to throw on the network. Um, to me, networking is a subset of that IT umbrella, that blob out there, just like AV, just like your database administrators and your security admins. Like your security admin is not optimizing your database. Your database administrator is not installing your network switches. Your network admin is not repairing your faculty or end user's desktop. They're all subsets of this blob of IT that just keeps eating up. I know I've seen this thrown around a couple times on Twitter and stuff. Think of it as a medical field. Everybody, all doctors are doctors, but then you have your plastic surgery, a surgeon, you have your brain surgeon, you have your heart surgeon. They're all doctors, but they're all specialized. And that's what AV is, just a specialized of IT. Another analogy I used was I used this on the AV Live podcast. We're in AV, we're into music. think about I know there's some sub notes there, but really there's what, 7 big notes in music. But how many genres do we have? We have country, we have rap, we have classic, we have jazz. They're all subset of music, but they're all done differently.
So would would it make sense then, because I do agree that AV has its specialties and its specialists, would it would would everybody in AV should everybody in AV need to be familiar with IT and with needing to speak the IT language, or is that limited to certain areas or scopes, whether it's a designer or a programmer or a consultant?
Um, it never hurts. The more you know, the better off you are. But y- in a way, yes. You need to be able to speak the IT language because IT has a history and it's changing and changing dramatically. By IT used to be the island of no or the department of no. Like, oh, I want to throw my projector on a network. No. Oh, I want to run Python on, or I want Python to run on this. No. Like, that's what IT was. They didn't want to anyone into their ecosystem. But the thing is now IT is seeing and we're all have a common goal, especially in my field of higher education. Our end goal is to educate the students. So that department of no is not a department of no. It's a let's figure it out the proper way. And being able to speak IT language brings you all into the common area. Again, let's go back to that whole medical analogy. Your plastic surgeon knows how to talk to a brain surgeon, knows how to talk to a heart surgeon, but they also know the effects of what they're doing has on these other bodies. Now, can they open up a heart and repair a heart? Most likely not, but they would know the toll that they're doing might take on. And they're like, hey, I need to bring this SME in and get their opinion. And just like a heart surgeon would be like, okay, plastic surgeon, they're not going to, like a heart surgeon is not going to come in and be like, okay, I'm going to reconstruct your face. But they could figure out the toll that it would take on the heart, or a brain surgeon, the toll it will take on the brain, and they can all come to a common goal. Just like in IT and AV, we need to come to a common goal. We need our equipment to work so we can get our message out. Now we got to talk the same language so we can do that.
So it is interesting that what the way you're putting it, and I do agree that it used to be no, and it used to be that we would have to prove ourselves as AV professionals to the IT administrator or the IT the IT department, that we were competent and we knew what we were doing. And as you said, I think that no was based out of fear that we were going to do something that was going to take down their network, or it was going to introduce a breach or a vulnerability, or just in general they were going to be liable for something that we did. And somehow something's changed, and I wonder if that's the manufacturers who have started to develop more IT friendly products, or is it that the IT departments and IT professionals have become more uh, understanding of what AV is, because a lot of them have had to get their hands dirty with it. So where it used to be very separate silos, and silo is always an analogy that we use. That now we're kind of merging, and we've talked about in the industry convergence, and that ship has sailed. But we've kind of we almost had like a meeting of the minds where they know more about us and we know more about them, and it seems like there's a higher trust factor, or a better openness for cooperation?
I think this really comes about one, I think a lot of AV professionals are showing that they are competent. Like you were saying, that you had to prove yourself. And I'm finding more and more AV people are doing that. They're starting to talk the IT language. They're getting their certification. They're learning. What I think AV really is lacking in is the standards. IT is very much on their standards. I use this analogy right now. If I went out and bought a Cat 5e cable, I can care less what maker or brand I buy. Every one's wired up the same. You either have an A or a B, and it's your the green and orange are the ones crossover, but every other pair are identical. The hue might be a little different, the quality of the cable might be different, but every cable is identical. Take an XLR. You open them up, they're all different. Now you got to figure out which pin is hot, which one's your common, which one's your ground. There's you got 4 wires, you got 3 wires, they're all different. That's where I think where IT is looking at AV and going, get your house together before you're coming into my house. Um, but unfortunately, we're all seeing that we need to work together and get to that common goal. And I think AV is starting to get to that standard where they're starting to use the programming of Python and HTML5 and all that stuff to get into that IT aspect of programming. I still feel that some of the hardware is lacking because to me, I feel like they're trying to subset or sidestep IT by putting their own network gear in. I'm sorry, manufacturers. My video switcher does not need to be a network switch. Let my network switch be a network switch. Don't throw a DHP server in my video switcher. Don't need it. And that causes a lot of problems. I know on corporate networks and stuff. So until AV really gets into a standard and true standards, they're still going to be a look at sideways by IT, but IT is learning these are people I need to play with.
Those are really good points, and a lot that I may not have even thought of. And it is true that even going back to RS-232, yes, there are ways that are more popular to pin cables, straight through or crossed, and that's what you see mostly. But that doesn't mean that that's going to be a guarantee. And for whatever reason, there was never one way to actually do it, and even the control systems were one pins one way and the other pins the other way, and it's because they think that their way is going to be more common. Um, Regardless, we've always made it work, but I see what you're saying, and it'd be nice if everybody agreed to one way of doing things. Um, I, as we wrap up with this, it just made me think, as you were explaining some of these insights, is the influence of the technology manager one of the reasons why, or either one of the catalysts for making AV and IT a closer group, or is that a product of it potentially, where technology managers now have come from the IT side and moved over to AV?
Really, what I think is the catalyst that bringing this together is our end users. Our end users are becoming power users. They're sitting at home and they're streaming their phone to their TV. They're connecting their computer to their TV. They're using multiple devices. They're switching it around, and they're coming back to the office and be like, "Hey, IT," because that's who they know to call. I want to be able to do this, and now IT needs to figure out how to do it. So now they're looking at the AV people to bring in and get that area taken care of, or they're doing on their own and they're struggling because they don't know they're not an SME in AV. So I definitely think our end users. I mean, in higher education, our students, our faculty members are the ones coming in and being like, yo, I want to use this, make it work. It used to be like, no, you got your corporate and your consumer devices separate, but almost now consumers want their Apple TVs in corporate environments. Not the best way of doing it, but that's what they want.
I heard something years ago, and I'm not going to quote this properly, but it was something like maybe a campus budgets like 8 IP addresses per student or something crazy like that because of all the different products that they carry, from gaming systems to laptops to tablets to phones. It was a crazy number. Maybe 8 is too high, but it was a crazy number.
I can see I know on our wireless network, if I recall correctly, I think users are limited to 3 devices. Think about phone, tablet, and computer. And most likely they're maxing those out.
Oh, easily.
Yeah. So I know I have like, and we laugh at it, be like, people will come up to me and go, stop being a wireless hog. Because I got so many devices, I'm switching back and forth, turning things off because I got my personal and then I got my work stuff. So it's like, yeah, I can definitely see 8 being a good budget.
So as we round up this episode, what would be a good tip for a programmer to know when it comes to IT? And I'd also like to hear from the audience as to what their experiences have been and how they've been advancing their knowledge. But from your perspective, what would you recommend?
I kind of think we've been hitting it a lot. Where saying learn the IT language. I don't. I hate saying this. Come across saying like IT should be the ruler of it, but IT is a big, powerful beast, and it's moving. And if AV continues to drag their heels, IT is going to go. You missed the bus. We're moving on. And we're just going to throw what we need to and make it work, and we'll improve as we go. So learn the Python, learn the C sharp and the C plus plus and any language. And then most important, learn your security. Security aspect is vital, and know that you need to patch and you need to update and you need to make sure that you're an expert in your field. So when that other SME, when that network administrator comes in and goes, hey, I need to make a change my ACL, how's that's going to affect your projectors? If you don't know what an ACL is, you're going to look like a tool that's sitting there. Like, know the language. Doesn't mean you know how to program switches or how to configure ACLs, but at least know what the common language is. Get out there, learn ACLs, uh, firewall, stuff like that. For those who don't know, ACLs is access control list, which is on network switches.
Well, I think that's a great tip. And is there any resource or any site that you would recommend?
Definitely Google whatever you can for IT. If you hear a term in the IT language you don't know, Google it, learn it, and that'll take you down the rabbit hole because you have one thing that pops up with another term that takes you down another rabbit hole. And get out there to classes. I'm trying to think that CompTIA is a good source to learn from, and Vixa is starting to improve their IT offering as well. I mean, just the past InfoComm, I took a couple good classes where I actually just wrote about it my November article for Higher Ed AVIT.
Very good. Well, that's a good tie-in to our wrap up. If anybody wants to get more information about IT or ask you specific questions, or want to learn more about where they can get answers to some of the things that they're trying to chase down, how can they reach you and learn what you're up to?
You can always reach me on Twitter at AV_James King. I'm on LinkedIn, not there much, but I'm on there. As I mentioned, I write a monthly article for the Higher Ed digital magazine called IT and AV. And I'm out there on the interwebs. You can find me.
Absolutely. So for me, you can reach me on social at Steve Greenblatt. I do some writing for AV Network, and I also write for my company blog at controlconcepts.net. But please, if you could let us know what you think and let us know what you want to hear more about, and ask us some questions. That's what this show is all about. So if you send us some feedback, we'll give you a mention. We've had a couple of guests on recently, and we're happy to expand the show and include more voices. So reach out to us, leave us a rating or review. You could find us on YouTube and on Apple and Google Podcasts. And we definitely like to hear from you. So with that, this is all we have for Ask the Programmer.